All right, magazines in the age of specialization. This chapter starts out with these people, um, Chip and Joanna Gaines, who have a show on the HGTV channel, and they also supplement that with their magazine. Right, they have a magazine, quarterly magazine called Magnolia Journal, and they look on their magazine as an important part of their marketing strategy. And so it's kind of interesting because they kind of I've noticed a resurgence of them. I think in our COVID time or in our work from home time that and I don't know if it's because of HGTV or because of the magazine or something, or because of the interviews that they've been doing, but this slide is a couple of years old, and in a previous year, it seemed like their popularity of this couple had waned, and they got their marketing together, and they get more popular. But again, let's look at a little clip of what they're all about with the magazine and their whole branding strategy.
So the process of the magazine, every issue we get in a room and we, for days, just sit and think about what theme we're wanting to tackle. And for fall, we really felt like wholeness just felt right. What I love about this theme of wholeness is it's really taking every part of your story, whether it be sad, happy, the joy, the pain, the beautiful memories, the harder ones, all of it, and taking all of these imperfections, taking all of the cracks and the pieces and pulling them together and really owning that as your full story. The visual team, what they have an amazing gift of doing is taking these concepts, these stories, and these themes and bringing them to life. The visual team really likes to take the cover of every issue and concept that out in the shop. And so one of the things that they loved about this cover was just this library setting. We actually shot this cover in New York City at the Nomad Hotel super early in the morning. We had about 30 minutes to get in there, get the shot, and get out. This idea of wholeness, we kept seeing, books and stories leaning into your full story, and we just thought a library setting would really help take this idea of wholeness to another level. Last night we shut the shop down at 6. At 6:30 p.m. the team rolled in and just started taking everything down, and I just feel like every install it just keeps getting more and more efficient. Even though right now you walk in and it feels like everything's kind of everywhere, it's honestly we're at such a good place because the biggest parts of these displays are set, and now we just have to merchandise around them.
So I think my wife has a friend that actually made it a voyage to this area. This is a place that you can go to where they have their setup here. So talk about convergence, media convergence. They have a TV show, and they support it with a brick and mortar place. That's in the South. I forget where it's at right now, but they also support it with a magazine. I'm sure they probably have some books that go with this too. So media convergence right there. And the magazine is a big part of their marketing. Right. So magazines, can be a standalone thing and have been for a long time, but also they can be an adjunct to your marketing campaign, another way to reach out to people and to reach out to your audience, your market. The first political magazine debuted in London in 1704, and the reason why we consider this kind of like one of the first magazines is that the magazine format was printed up for the political kind of class, right? Magazine, by the way, derives from the Arabic makzan, which means storehouse. And magazines are, in military jargon, a magazine is where we store ammunition and things like that. So magazine is a storehouse of information. Here are a couple of political magazines that survive to this day. The Nation is a liberal magazine, National Review more of a conservative magazine. So this review was edited by Daniel Defoe and printed sporadically until 1713. Right. Um, and then we have other magazines from this time, and they focused on things like poetry, and we also have some poetry here, and philosophy, and then a gentleman's magazine. All right. But our magazines aren't really what we consider general market kinds of magazines. The magazines um, um, tended to be for more political and upper wealthy classes. By 1776, oh boy, by the revolutionary times here in the United States, a lot of our founding father types were printing magazines, had magazines. Paul Revere, not a signer of the Declaration of Independence, like these guys were, or the signers to the Constitution, but very definitely part of the crew. Look down here. This one is by B. Franklin. As Benjamin Franklin is also printing up magazines. It's doing magazines, about 100 of them by the time of the Revolutionary War here in the United States. So growth of the magazine industry was relatively slow after the revolution, and it's because of high delivery costs. And it's still, a lot of communities had their own weekly magazines by this date here, by 1825. But still, magazines were specialized, and they're basically for the religious, literary, and professional classes, and the political class um, was really what the first magazines were marketed for, and not for general interest. Now, our first general interest magazine was the Saturday Evening Post, and it debuted around 1821 and continued. The book says continues into the modern era. I think it folded in the last year and a half, but this was a long running general interest magazine. All right. That's marketed to people like you and me, right? People who are not part of that political class. So what happened with the growth of these magazines, the benefit of the growth of the magazine market was that it improved literacy for people, at least here in the United States, because it could be passed around to a lot of different people. And this is, how you experience things. And it also helped in the education of our public. Better printing helped. Better printing technology helped for the growth of the magazine. Our postal technology also changed, and that helped because magazines, they're delivered by the post office. Now, you go to the grocery store, there's magazines all over the place, right? But that's a more recent phenomenon that we'll get into. But before that point of purchase, that grocery store magazine, it was all delivered by the post office. And so mail delivery was a big part of this. In the fledgling days of the post office, the mail delivery was by anybody. If you were heading out to the what we call the Midwest now, but that was really the West. If you were going out there, you might get a sack of mail to distribute to the place that you were going. But eventually, we actually got bona fide postal carriers, and that helped a lot. Sarah Josepha Hale um, debuted the first magazine targeting females. It was the Ladies Magazine, and this is revolutionary because most magazines, targeted men, and like I said, the political class before that. But this one was for women exclusively, and it merged with this one, Godey's Ladies book, and it helped educate lower and middle class women who were denied higher education. Harper's Monthly magazine came along, and they benefited a lot by the better printing, and they featured these illustrations, these wonderful illustrations, and got very popular. And known for that, and this really helped Harper's take off. In 1879, the Postal Act of 1879 lowered postage rates, and this created a boom for magazines. Look at this is a number of magazines, right? And you can see after 1879, our next hit here is 1890, and you can see the jump in magazines and the number of magazines, and they keep going up and up and up, right? So the lower postal rates help in that. Now you can argue that somewhere in here something else happened, and we had the delivery of magazines in supermarkets, and yes, so I would also say that the continued rise here had to do with the point of purchase availability of magazines. But this increased circulation helped advertising revenues soar because magazines derive they monetize themselves in a couple of ways. One of them is circulation, is that you actually purchase the magazine in some way. And the other one is that there are ads, there's advertisements in the magazine, and they get rates for that. Right now, let's see, in our digital age, we have all these websites and apps, all right? And so that's worldwide, but also national distribution of advertising, right? When you go on your social media, you'll see some sort of advertising for something, right? And that can be targeted across the nation, or at least in a region. Before the digital era, our national advertising was done by radio and television, right? And before radio and television, in our printed era, our national advertising was done by magazines. Now, magazines, national advertising still exists today, as does radio and television. National advertising still exists today. But that concept of I can reach, a national audience in a magazine, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Ladies' Home Journal, again, a women's magazine, revolutionary, hits the first target of a million, circulation of 1 million, because 1 million is a nice round number, but they were the first ones to hit it. That's great. So the rise in circulation also coincided, just randomly coincided with social changes. And the magazines were allowed journalists to write in depth about issues. Neat thing about newspapers is that they have news, right? And every once in a while they do an in-depth story. But magazines did in-depth stories, do in-depth stories all the time. And so during the 20s and 30s, they were writing about social change that was happening in our world. We have these investigative journalists, and these were known as the muckrakers, and they were writing on all sorts of issues. They raised awareness of our of how some of our drugs, and food are marketed to us were suspect. And because of the efforts of the muckrakers, we got the Pure Food and Drug Act. Also, the meat industry was rife with all sorts of problems, right? And the muckrakers writing about that gave us the Meat Inspection Act, and also antitrust laws. Another great video here to tell us all about what the deal is with muckrakers. even though the muckrakers might be construed as a, like a derogatory term, it was even, even Teddy Roosevelt saw the benefit of the muckrakers to expose all sorts of ills going on with our society, whether it was corruption in government or unsanitary meat packaging or food and drug packaging and production, and just the living conditions of newly immigrants and people in urban areas. There was a little shout out to Upton Sinclair for the jungle, the book and articles he wrote about the meatpacking industry. If you've seen the movie There Will Be Blood, that's loosely based on another Upton Sinclair investigation on just the stranglehold that the petroleum industry goes through. Now, it's loosely based on some of his things there, but it's a pretty interesting movie with some great performances in it. All right, general interest magazines really proliferated after World War after the 50s, and again in our culture from World War One through the um, Great Depression and World War II, a lot of culture was left on hold because we were fighting and taking care of all sorts of ills going on in our society. But after that, we were able to, the technology also improved, and we were able to branch out in all of our media sources. So after the 50s, we get a proliferation of magazines. We get things like investigative journalism, broad national topics. So these, are some magazines here: Time, U.S. News, which eventually becomes U.S. News and World Report, and Newsweek are news magazines. General interest magazines, Reader's Digest is a book that publishes condensed, excuse me, not a book, but a magazine that publishes condensed versions of poetry and books and longer articles, makes it in a really more digestible format for people to read. And we also get photojournalism. And this, it comes out because during this period of the 1950s, we don't have a lot of television yet, television coming out, but it hasn't done the market saturation that we see later on in the 1960s. So post World War II and into the 50s, there wasn't a big visual presence of television, even though it's coming. And so photojournalism takes off. And so these magazines, Life is the first one and becomes the most popular magazine for a while. Look is its competitor, and they feature full page photos and quarter page and half page photos, along with some journalism, but they're photojournalist magazines. And that gave an advantage over radio, which was, uh, all that oral kind of medium. So during the 50s, during the late 50s, we get more of a saturation of television, right? And we get a changing consumer taste because consumers are, they want to have a lot of things like televisions, and toasters, and, appliances. People are buying homes. There's rising postal costs, and because of that, the ad revenue starts falling. And this is true anytime there's kind of a new medium, like with television. A lot of the advertisers see television as a new platform to advertise on, and so they run there, and so there's falling ad revenues. Same thing happened in our digital era. When digital era started happening, a lot of advertisers ran to Google or wherever it started advertising in the digital space. That's and then we get the advent of television, and that really changes people's behavior a lot, right? TV Guide was the first magazine that came out. TV Guide is kind of an interesting magazine because back in the day, you wanted to know what was on TV, right? So this was a magazine that was published. It's a national magazine, but in your region, it would publish, what the TV schedule is for your region, and then also feature articles about television, the television programs that are on. And so it was a really specialized magazine, but it really took off. And one of the things that TV Guide did is they put themselves right here, right here in the checkout line, right? Um, and the power of the checkout lines and the growing power of people going to the checkout lines and seeing that what they call POP, the point of purchase, right? You can put your magazine right there at the point of purchase, and television. That dovetailing together gave TV Guide a really big following. I was in Safeway not too long ago at my local at the checkout line, and I snapped this picture just to kind of show we got some, general interest magazines, right? And we've got our tabloid mag. Where's a tabloid magazine? There's something here. Well, Us is not, but there's some tabloids in here, right? And then there's some women's magazines. There's and a cooking magazine. And I just snapped this picture because fantasy football right there. This is really valuable space. You just don't your supermarket doesn't just randomly put things here. All right. This is the high value space. So I was really surprised to see something like fantasy football. And we also have a new cars kind of magazine. So it's branching out also to some of men's interests. I don't know. Eventually Saturday Evening Post, Life, and Look, they fold because of our changing tastes, right? Because we have television, and that visual kind of media goes, interest goes there. And during this time when these magazines were losing subscriptions, losing revenues, a lot of issues sold at a loss just to maintain circulation figures. So you would they wouldn't cover their nut, right? They wouldn't cover their expenses on subscriptions, but they needed that number of people looking at the magazine so that they could charge more for their ads. So that's the thought behind that. And a lot of the ad dollars are split with television. Our postal rates increased. And so the general magazines that tended to survive this era tended to be women's magazines, right? So women's magazines, still a big thing, still a big thing. And here's just a chart that was in the book that you can kind of see the difference in the kinds of magazines. So here in the 1970s, we got Reader's Digest, TV Guide, Women's Day, Better Homes, Families, all of these outside of National Geographic, you would find there at the checkout stand. You wouldn't find, then you get down here like Playboy and National Geographic. These are your subscription kind of magazines. But everything else here, was something that you find in that point of purchase at the checkout line. Look at the difference in the kinds of magazines here, right? The AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, they got a magazine and a bulletin, and you get magically sent those to you when you're like 50 plus. You just join the club. Same thing with Costco. When you join the Costco club, you get this. Same thing when you go like to GameStop and start buying things, you get issued Game Informer and AAA Living. Right. This is another thing for people who have AAA insurance or the AAA card. They get this. So the types of magazines that proliferate here are the types of magazines that don't necessarily, aren't necessarily that point of purchase kind of place, but more of that captive audience. That kind of place where I'm this age, or I've subscribed to Costco, or I go shop at GameStop or something like that and get these. People Magazine, 1974. And we think of People Magazine as, it's a huge enterprise right now. But when it started, a lot of people were saying, People Magazine, forget that. People Magazine, that's just too specialized to be a mass market magazine, focus on celebrities, music, and pop culture. Oh my goodness. It's a huge enterprise, and it's got a lot of other magazines that followed suit. And not only that, we've got TMZ, so focus on, they were on to something in 74 that a lot of people hadn't realized in our culture, that celebrity music and pop culture is really big interest. to the general public. So magazines have also moved online. We've got um, like Wired magazine, which really was an online magazine that did print up, copies. Popular Mechanics was a magazine that, pre-digital era, but they have really benefited from the digital era because now if you want to do a build of something, you can go to their website and get a 3D kind of instructions on how to do the build. And this is a really neat thing to do. I bought a barbecue. I bought a fancy barbecue, right? And I had to download their app so I could get a 3D kind of version of how to put the barbecue together, So this is a big thing now is having this digital presence where you could do these kinds of things. But these all featured Wired magazine, like featured original content. The magazines that moved online featured original content and such. And then we also have magazines that are, they don't have a printed up version. You have to get them online. And we first called these webzines, right? But now we just call them like salon.com or slate.com, and they're legitimate sites for breaking news and discussions of culture and politics. So we do have magazine formats in our digital space too. And here are just another, like, if these are just apps for different magazines. I just pulled up a pretty graphic here of, if you went to the Apple store or if you went to Google Play or something and, just did a search for magazines. Here are the different magazines, some of them that are web only and some of them that have a web presence, even though they have a printed edition you can get for your phone or your iPad or whatever. And magazines can be grouped into different groups. One of them is they're grouped basically by advertiser type. Okay, so the first advertiser type are consumer magazines, and they're general consumer product ads in them. Okay, and I've got O and Cosmopolitan, but you can think of pretty much all the magazines that were in that rack there at my picture there at Safeway. Those are all general interest consumer magazines for general consumer product ads. Now there are some that are pitched for women and some that are pitched primarily for men. That kind of, there was a men's health somewhere in there too, but that's considered consumer magazine with general consumer product ads. Our next one is for business or trade. And so these are ads for occupational groups like Advertising Age. It's a huge magazine for people who are in marketing and advertising. And I didn't know that this was a big magazine, but we've got one for just people that are in the grocery business, just to pull a couple off here. So we have business or trade magazine, just like we have trade books, right? And this one, because I've spent all my whole life, not on the farm, although I have farmers in my family, I had no idea that we had an advertiser type that was for agriculture products and lifestyles. So here are a couple of farm magazines. Now, Joanna and Chip Gaines, their magazine, I know they kind of have their lifestyle for a more rural kind of lifestyle, but that magazine's consumer magazine for sure, for sure. And we get more and more specialized magazines. And this is so true with all of our media. Radio used to be a general interest kind of thing, and now we got these specialized formats. We'll get into that when we do that. Television is a general kind of thing, and they got more and more specialized, and then we'll get into that when we do television and things like that, right? And same thing with magazines. They target by gender, by age, by ethnic group, and they also target by your interests, your special interest areas, like whether it's sports. Here we got a sports, right? Whether it's literature, so kind of National Geographic is literature and travel and stuff like that. We have our tabloids. There's a tabloid here, right? And they're broken down into target audience, as a lot of our surveying, a lot of our media is broken into the specialization by target audience. So men's and women's magazine. Here's a men's health. We've got age. So we have young adults. Here we have even younger people right here. Some elite magazines, Atlantic might be considered an elite magazine. They do. They're kind of the modern day muckrakers. You know, they're doing hard hitting, longer pieces. Some of it politically motivated, some of it not. We have ethnic magazines, absolutely, are big, big, big. And then we have here our supermarket tabloids. All right, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour. This is a great place in our PowerPoint to stop and take a break. So we will do that right now. Take a little 5-minute pause and then come back, finish up the PowerPoint. There's not that much left. And then we'll do take a look at what our assignment's going to be for next week. Okay, so 5 minutes, be back in 5. Go take a break. Go walk outside. It's the weather is perfect. So go check that out. See you in 5. All right, here we are. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. I'm gonna. Where did it go? Hang on. What a mess. All right, we're good here. All right, come on back. I think I have this thing under control here. Let's see if we can't get it going again. I want that. I want to make sure that's happening. Gotta have that. No, want that. And away we go, as they used to say. All right. So here are the different departments of our magazine company, right? We have the editorial department, and that includes the publisher. And the publisher is basically like the owner and the final say, but that person could be, the publisher could be somebody who's kind of like an absentee owner. And in that case, there'd be an editor in chief too, who is the final backstop for everything that gets published in the magazine. Underneath that, we have managing editors. So somebody's managing a certain department, a different department, and we have sub editors. And the sub editors oversee things like photography and illustrations. And there's the sub editors for reporting and writing, and for editing, for layout, print, multimedia designs, your editorial department. And then we have our production and technology. So this would maintain computer and printing hardware, yes, for the magazines that are printed up. I'm sure there would be IT that would be in there too, right? If it was a web zine kind of thing. We have the advertising and sales department, a big department in any business, because this is where the revenue is generated from. So the salesperson is meeting with clients, reaching out to clients, finding new clients, arranges promotions with the clients where somehow the magazine can partner with the business and promote themselves, and then places ads. And the rate cards indicate ad sizes and prices. Rate card is kind of an outmoded kind of term, but the term exists today, right? Still exists today. The rate card used to be a card that was printed up, right? And you would print up this card, and it would have all your rates, and you would give those rates to advertisers, and that would let them know what the ad rates are, right? But pretty much anymore, the rate card is in a digital form, and they can change the rates more frequently because they're in a digital form rather than in a card. And then we have the circulation and distribution department, how we're getting these out to people, right? And it monitors single copy and subscription sales. And also that subscriptions can be, are paid through different ways, right? One of them can be evergreen, which is you lay your credit card down, and every year it just like charges your card. So it goes on and on. There are controlled, which means kind of a captive audience. You ever been on an airplane, right? And there's a magazine there in the seat back. You're a captive audience. You're on that airplane. And so that is a controlled audience right there. Or there can be digital space. I think there was a panel here. I don't know if I've missed it or if it's coming up, but the pass around number is an important thing. So I just want to mention that too, is that somehow, you get a magazine, right? And you get done with a magazine, but a friend comes over, or you have other people in your family come over, and they see the magazine, and you give it to them, or they read it while you're hanging out, or there are magazines sometimes still. I don't know in the COVID time if that happens much anymore, but there was pre-COVID magazines in your doctor's office and dentist's office, right? So the subscription numbers sometimes are not representative of how many people are actually reading your magazine, and so there's a pass around number too that is also talked about, where that there's a subscription number. These are the number of bona fide subscriptions we have, but we believe that number is actually higher. It's this number due to the pass around audience, due to the people who actually come in contact with a magazine that haven't paid for it. They get in their doctor's or office, or they have friends or neighbors who have passed on copies to them. So that's also in a circulation number, a different type of circulation number that they can have. These are our major magazine chains. We have Time Life, right? Time Incorporated. Time Life, or Life, there's that magazine, Life magazine, right? That was that pictorial magazine. And we call it Time anymore, but it's the largest magazine chain in the United States. Condé Nast is big in upscale magazines and also travel magazine. Yes, we have Hearst. Yes, the William Randolph Hearst people of newspaper fame that we'll talk about next week, right? And we also have women's, Meredith Corporation specialized in women's magazine. Rodale is health and wellness. And there's all sorts of American magazines carved out of global niche markets and things like that. We have a concept of a magalog, which is another type of online magazine, specialized magazine. And it's custom printed sometimes, or it's just to a custom audience. And Ford is this magazine that is printed just for Ford customers, people who own Fords, or this Costco connection could be considered a magalog, according to the textbook. Here is just kind of a readout of the different ways magazines are getting to people, the different kinds of circulation. Looks like ESPN has the market pretty covered. Here's the total brand. So ESPN up here, people. WebMD, right? So where's WebMD in print? Right? But they are all over the web, right? And mobile. So they have that. I bet you there's some video in here too of WebMD. I'm sure you could probably find them on YouTube. So this is just a breakout of where the magazines, are available across platform. We do have alternative magazines too, magazines that start out maybe small and are for really niche alternative voices. And historically, these have been political kinds of magazines. But what what becomes a niche magazine has evolved over time, broadened over time. And sometimes, they call them zines that are self-published. Just like we have self-published authors, we have people that make magazines and self-publish them too. So this is a self-published magazine. Some magazines, these three magazines here, started out as being alternative magazines. Mother Jones was really alternative in the 60s, right? And Nation too in their 70s. National Review was an alternative magazine. They are now popular mainstream magazines. So some of them start small and stay small. Some of them start small and kind of go away. But some of them actually meet the mainstream. And here is a neat little video to show us about that alternative press and how people are trying to foster and nurture an alternative press.
To some, the recent closures of mags such as Glamour and Look are just another indication that print is dead. But for the curators of Somerset House's latest exhibition, physical magazines are alive and well. They've just been hiding in an independent space outside of commercial publishing. Print Tearing It Up is a real celebration of the indie mag landscape, exploring modern counterculture via titles such as Spare Rib, Black Dwarf and Galdem. But for co-curator Paul Gorman, it all began with the face.
Yeah, let him know I'm ready for love, and I don't care anymore. It's easy to forget.
I'd just come off publishing my book, The Story of the Face, which was about the Face magazine. But the postscript, the final chapter of the book, looked at how the kind of silent influence of the Face magazine was evident in the new resurgence of independent magazines around the country.
Let go my head.
The advertising world has changed so much. I mean, the advertising world doesn't really know where it is. It's kind of, as usual, chucking as much at the wall to see where it sticks. And so these new magazines are quite often quixotic enterprises. Within that form of expression, commercial values were secondary to the expression of ideas. That seemed to be the most important thing.
Untouching mess.
The short lifespans of the magazines featured here may indicate an industry without a financially viable future. But for these publishers, it's not about longevity. It's about ideas and how they're communicated through the medium of the page.
So maybe in every platform or every medium, you find enthusiasts who are who are fostering new ideas and who they're turned on by that medium, and they want to nurture some new alternative voices. And we have this in magazines. We have I want to say pirate radio, but we have low power radio. There are people doing that. There are people who are self-publishing books. So there are certain media that lend themselves to doing this, to still being viable or nurturing new thoughts and new ideas. Magazines have played a central role in transforming our country from a producer society to a consumer society. And you could see that's true just because of all the advertising and national advertising, regional advertising that goes into magazines. Our book says there is a diminished national voice today, and that's because of this bias about this digital bias that the digital economy is going to take over everything. And I would say maybe it's diminished, but not put a value judgment on that. All right, it has changed. Its voice has changed a little bit today than when pre-digital, and definitely pre-electronic. All of that has changed. Contemporary magazines has helped us think about ourselves as participant in a democracy, small d. And again, this is just the idea that the tools for expression exist for us all, and that we can all take part and in our social discussion. And we can all interact in our social discussion. That's what that small d is all about. We're often viewed as consumers first and citizens second. And for the academic press, this is like another value judgment. But in the corporate world, this is how a lot of our a lot of the money is, how a lot of our advertising happens, right? Is that we have to find out who our audience is and then market to them, right? And I would submit, because I've spent a little bit of time in the marketing and advertising world, I would submit to people who subscribe to this this sentence here, that if you do view people as consumers first and citizens second, you won't do as good a job marketing to people if you just view them as individuals, as people first, and then how can you market to them? All right. I think that is a more, it's definitely it can be a better way to market to people. You can be more effective by marketing to people by not looking at them as consumers, but looking at them as individuals who have interests, right? And that's not only true for marketing, magazines and advertising, but it's also in marketing your films and your messages. Think about your audience. Don't think about them as how you can monetize them. Just think about them as who they are, and design your message for them. Right? So magazines are, dependent on advertising. The readers, you know, I just covered this, readers are just viewers and purchasers of material goods. And again, that's another academic kind of um, idea that is not, you know, the best kind of thought. You can actually do better as an advertiser or marketer by thinking your audience as individuals and people, and marketing to that. Good magazines maintain our connection to words. That's a good thing. And in an increasingly digital culture, and we can have good, you know, even in the digital space, we can have really, you know, really good words. You know, we can still maintain that connection to words. Going forward, of course, all of our magazines, just like books, in our digital space, will have interactive content, have clickable links, have all of these things in the digital space that our books can have or do have in the digital space, more interactivity. And that's a cool thing. That's a cool thing. And there we are. There we are.